this thing working yet?
Yeah, we're live.
Check 1, check 2.
In 3, 2, 1. Welcome back, listeners. It's Arts and Crimes.
What's up? It's your boy, Brandon.
And Josh.
Coming at you full steam. Don't look backwards.
Why not?
I don't know.
We have to keep talking. I just put chocolate in my mouth.
I also like backwards specifically. Instead of don't look back, you say don't look backwards. As if like, they're gonna, because then you'll see your brain.
As a fair warning to all of our listeners, 2 of the 3 of us, I'll let you guess which 2, have mild colds of some kind.
It's major cold.
It's me, baby.
Okay, but we probably should get to what we came here for today.
The art or the crime?
Are we
Both.
gonna do a real intro?
Oh,
That
yeah.
was a pretty good one.
I feel like
I
we
like that
nailed
one.
it. We're going with it. Because every time that we've done that so far, where we're like, let's take it from the top, I just go with the first one anyways.
Oh, good.
It's going great.
Today I teach these 2 idiots.
Let's get to the crime first and the art second.
Actually, this time it's art first, crime middle,
Isn't that always?
Yeah, I feel like art is always
crime
first.
in the middle.
crime in the middle,
And then more art about the crime.
more art as a follow-up.
Well,
Oh,
So it's a crime sandwich this week, right?
excellent.
with artisanal bread.
Oh,
Artisanal? Oh, man.
You guys are on
you
fire.
are on fire.
yeah.
Jinx.
I'm a certified dad.
Yeah, you are. That'll
I've seen the children.
certification will come up later, but not about being a dad. Okay, but here it is. Here's the real thing, what we're talking about. So today we're talking about comic books and when America tried to burn them all.
Oh, fun.
Did you know about that?
Yeah.
I don't.
You
know
don't?
about
Excellent.
the
I know about
burning
it.
of the comic book time
Yeah.
period?
First thing, Starry Night. Second thing,
The Scream.
the Scream.
Get it right. Get it right.
Nailed it.
So should we do the what do I know about this, and then we can prove me wrong?
Well, I mean, I think just the fact that you know about it is enough. It's actually like, I think the whole like superheroes comic book story in and of itself is really interesting. And I had a really hard time condensing this because what ended up happening is I wanted to go on tangents constantly. I was like, we could do a whole episode about Aquaman. We could do a whole episode about Superman.
Gross.
And I don't even like Superman. So
Do you like Aquaman?
I do like Aquaman. And
But we don't.
we only briefly mention Aquaman. I promise.
Yeah.
Do we bring up Spawn?
We do.
Ooh.
And
Sit back, listeners. This is gonna be good.
I do it almost entirely just for you because he's your favorite and he doesn't really relate to this at all.
Oh,
wait,
good.
who's my favorite?
Who's your favorite? Batman.
Probably.
Yeah.
I'm lame. I'm basic. I said that to Michaela earlier today.
That you're lame and basic.
You're
Yeah,
less because her favorite is Superman.
Superman. That's true. She's a little more basic.
Oh,
Because my favorite is Gambit, followed by Aquaman. They're the 2 tops. But we don't actually talk about Gambit, and we only barely mention Aquaman. So I tried. We do mention Superman and Batman both, and then I wanted to include Spawn for it, so I looked up some Spawn stuff for you.
well,
Okay,
I
let's
think
go.
that shows great journalistic integrity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I tried really hard. So let's start at the very beginning.
Very good place to start.
Thank you. That is the second time that we've made Sound of Music jokes. Bonus if you can name them both. But
The other time was a different. No, it wasn't the same one.
I think it was the same one.
I'm just over here proving how wrong I am all the time. My role in this one is to be the idiot.
No, not at all. But
I put a lot of effort into my craft.
being wrong?
Yeah.
Well, you're not doing great today.
Or am I?
I guess we will see. So when I asked a few people who the very first superhero was, everybody knew the answer as Superman. But I just want to clarify, he is not.
Hercules is.
Incorrect. I mean, if you're counting all of those guys, that's where they like came from, yes. But there was actually a published superhero comic with like the spangly tights and everything right before Superman. So I consider it close enough. And if you look on the internet, like who is the first superhero, this guy comes up. And it's relatively close to right before Superman's created. So that's why like I feel like it counts.
Regular Man.
Regular Man.
It was a lot less successful.
So he was actually called The Phantom. And he was first published in February 17th of 1936. He was created by Lee Falk, and drawn by Ray Moore. And he debuted in a newspaper comic strip, because that's kind of where comic book heroes and stuff got their start. He wore, so his outfit, and I point this out because I think it's important, because again, we think of Superman as kind of the first hero, but if you took Superman's super outfit and you made it purple with stripy underwear instead of red, and you took away the cape, it's essentially the Phantom.
Okay.
The Phantom is purple with like black and purple striped underwear. And he does have like a hood that he wears, but it's not like a hood. It's like a spangly hood that gives him like a widow's peak.
I really like the diagonally striped underwear.
Yeah.
You know how vertical stripes makes you tall and horizontal make you fat? What does diagonal stripes do to you?
It makes you fast.
It makes you look like you're leaning.
Well, in like art, traditionally, diagonal lines are more dynamic, so they have more energy and more action to them. So maybe the artists were trying to make him, without overdoing it by doing his whole suit diagonal.
They really want it. It draws the eye.
To the wrong regions. But anyways, he didn't have any superpowers. But he was just, it was listed as physically impressive. I'm putting quotes over that. So I think he was just really strong.
So he really was regular man.
He really was a regular man, yeah. He had, his big thing was he had a carefully guarded secret identity, and he had a secret hideout called the Skull Cave. And he also used advanced weapons and tools, including guns. And they kind of say that he was maybe an ancestor of Batman, but there's somebody else that was a much larger influence to Batman, so I don't know how much the Phantom goes in. But he uses a totem ring that is the shape of a skull to brand his enemies with the sign of the skull. And he is dedicated to the destruction of all forms of piracy, greed, and cruelty.
This really is an old guy if he's going up against pirates.
Yeah. Here's what's great is his backstory is that his father was Sir Christopher Standish, a British noble, but in later versions they change it. And he was like killed by pirates. And so the main character's name is Kit Walker. And all of his descendants switched from being British to American at some point. So they wanted him to be an American hero. And so they were like, we're just kidding about Sir Christopher Standish. He wasn't there. And he's just Kit Walker, a standard American. And then after his parents were killed by pirates, I guess, he was saved by these natives. And they fashioned him this Phantom costume. And he became this, crime-fighting, piracy-fighting guy. And all of his sons, he named Kit as well, so that they all took over his, the cowl or whatever. And so because he appeared to never die and lived for generations, he became the Phantom, and his catchphrase was, "The ghost who walks." And here's what I loved is he was still getting stuff created, animated, published, like TV shows, all the way into the 90s and early 2000s. And he is apparently crazy popular in Australia, Sweden, and India in particular. They love him.
Interesting.
So there you go. And in one of the most recent iterations of Kit Walker, his daughter took over the mantle, though I'm pretty sure she was still named Kit. But
nobody noticed that
suddenly it was
Her
a woman.
profile was a little different. I love that the Wikipedia page for it. It says, unlike other superheroes, the Phantom has no superpowers. He relies on his strength, intelligence, and he carries 2 guns.
So he relies on his guns. That's amazing.
He is equally as superpowered as a police officer.
Well, and technically Batman.
Yeah. Well, Batman's got
Money.
Yeah, and he's
That's
got
his-
gadgets and all kinds of stuff.
That's true.
Anyway, sorry.
Okay, but so I just wanted to give like a little bit of credit where credit is due. The first Phantom. But then we come to the most famous, everybody knows him.
Blanca.
Blanca from Street Fighter. Jacques Cousteau.
That's him. You did it. Also known as Superman. So, do you guys know any of the history of Superman?
Krypton,
yeah,
his
he came
planet
Okay,
blew
not on
up, and his parents.
That's
shot
on
him.
me. I asked the wrong question. So he was created by two Jewish immigrants, Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel. And superheroes kind of have this huge backbone in the traditional myths, like you were talking about, like Hercules and who's the guy in the Bible that you can't cut his hair? Samson?
Jesus.
You can cut his hair and he doesn't lose
Why
his
would
power.
you? Have you ever seen a picture of Jesus with short hair?
Yeah.
He's clearly the most superpowered person.
Yes.
But yes,
Samson.
Samson.
Yes.
Who I was talking about.
Long-haired Samson.
Yeah. And Achilles and these kind of famous things. And so the story kind of goes that Jerry Siegel said he couldn't sleep and he was having these dreams of these like ancient heroes and these ideas and he just couldn't get them out of his head. And so, and also like the more modern ones like Flash Gordon and Prince Valiant, who was their famous characters at the time. And so he calls up his artist friend, Joe Shuster, and starts explaining his ideas to Joe Shuster. And Joe Shuster was a big bodybuilder and into acrobatics and the costumes and all that kind of stuff. And so Joe Shuster started doing the first sketches of Superman. And Jerry Siegel had a particular like motivation to kind of create this character or this type of character because his father was actually killed in a robbery when Jerry was a teen. And so he kind of really liked the idea of these kind of heroes that could stop this kind of stuff from happening. And so they created Superman and, some of his story and that kind of stuff. And they went to go try to get him published, like put in the newspapers. And they were rejected over and over and over again for 5 years. Nobody wanted anything to do with Superman. And at this time, like I said, there was only really the Phantom as far as superheroes. And part of that is because the publishers that were kind of in control of what was being published as like pulps and, comic books and serials and that kind of stuff, were all known for being pretty sleazy. And a lot of them had connections to mobs. And so they weren't super interested in that for a long time. But a bunch of them decided they wanted to do something that wasn't as sleazy and wasn't as illegal. And so they decided they wanted to create comic books. And so the first set of these like mobsters trying to be legitimate created Detective Comics Company. And they decided to purchase the original ideas of Superman. DC is Detective Comics, yep. They really liked this idea because before what they were doing was just reruns and essentially porn is all they were publishing previously. And so they got a hold of these ideas that Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster had been trying to sell, and they bought 13 pages of Superman for $130, and now they owned Superman. So Jerry and Joe did not own Superman anymore, but they could create the comics through DC Comics. And they were commissioned to create the first actual comic book that was actually about a superhero for the whole book. So no other superhero had ever had a whole book. The Phantom did not have his own book. He was part of other books or just in the newspaper. And so in his first comic book, he like frees a wrongly convicted woman from death row. He beats up a wife beater. He stops a conspiracy between a senator and a weapons manufacturer. And so this character sort of becomes the idea of the all-American guy, which like at the time, especially because it was written by these two Jewish immigrants, he was, capturing what it was to become an American, right? To be an immigrant, to come to this country, to be successful, and be part of this nation. And so he was wildly famous. And so that was in 1939 that they were actually hired to do this full book. And this time, after Superman came out, Heroes just kind of took off. It was just so crazy popular that this time frame between technically they called it 1938 to 56 is the golden age of comic books. And that's kind of the time frame that we're going to sit in for this episode of Arts and Crimes. At the end of 1939, 7 different firms were producing 50 comic book titles. Within 1 year, that boomed to 24 publishing houses with 150 different comic books, most falling into this hero kind of persona. So some of the main ones, DC, which was one of the more prestigious at the time, that's the Detective Comics. It had more standard heroes that sort of fit within that same Superman zone. So DC wanted heroes to sort of combat the idea of Superman as well. So that's when they tried to create heroes that would be able to be as popular and effective, but still remain in the same, like within the same, like it could be in the same universe is what they were looking for, I think. Does that make sense? Like they didn't want to go like wildly opposite. They wanted somebody that would be as effective as Superman, but not anything like Superman, but still fit within that same universe.
So, like, they were going for continuity.
Yeah, like they weren't going to come up with Spawn, essentially. That'd be like way too wild.
So they didn't want to deviate too far from the recipe.
Yeah. They kind of, DC kept this sort of standard recipe for heroes that they wanted to do. And they were largely influenced by the pulps that were out. The pulps generally had much darker storylines. And this is just like a fun, just so you know, they were printed on pretty flimsy paper that had like ragged edges. And there's a term for that in art called deckled edges. And so like in printmaking, if you buy a print, it's like desirable to see that unfinished rough edge, and that's called a deckled edge. And so these comic books that they were producing all had these like deckled edges, and they were like flimsy and unfinished looking. But there was one in particular that was really, really popular, and it was known at the time as The Shadow. I had heard of this one. I was surprised that I knew about it. Have you guys heard of him at all?
I've literally just heard the name.
Oh, okay. So The Shadow, he essentially was in the pulps, and he was a radio show, which I found online. They have recordings of the original radio show from the 1930s, and I listened to half of it, and then I was like, that's enough.
Half of all of them, or half of
one episode? Yeah. So The Shadow, essentially, his...
Okay, hold on. Did they do a radio voice, like a radio voice where they're like, it's your boy, Shadow, coming in from the there.
Yeah.
Like, why did they do that? You influenced me. It's Shadow, the shady man who hides in the shadows.
They absolutely did. It was just like that. And I was like, am I being punked? Like, it was absolutely that. And it was actually kind of fun to listen to. But I was like, I know exactly what's going to happen. I'm not.
Why? I don't understand. Okay, I'm sure there's some, like, maybe it made sense with, like, the tinny speakers or something. But just the idea that everybody went to the radio station and they got the microphone in front of them and they're speaking normally. They're like, hey, bud, what's going on? Okay, are we ready? Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Hello, it's time for the daily news, and we're going to talk about it, and like they were like, they got to get that radio voice on.
Yeah, that's just the standard industry
Why?
standard.
It doesn't make any sense.
Maybe that's how they talked.
I should look that up because I
You
know
should.
like the movies with the like transatlantean. Is that the accent?
Mid-Atlantic.
The mid-Atlantic accent.
That's kind of made up.
Yeah, it's like not at all how they actually spoke, but it was in their movies all the time.
Yeah.
So I wonder, like, if it's the same, like
It
you were
is
saying,
the same kind of thing.
that's their radio talk. Because I cannot imagine being down at the restaurant being like, "Hey, why don't you pass me a drink there, Scotty?"
It could be just part of like the presentation and the pomp and just like the excitement, right?
The
like,
drama.
Imagine a circus, ringleader, right? He's not talking normal. He's trying to hype the crowd or whatever, and this maybe is.
And they're going there. You know what really excites the people back home when I go, "Hey, I'm over here.
It's your boy, the Shadow.
We're doing the shadow. It's the radio show." That really gets them psyched up at home.
Also, I should find a clip and put it on the Instagram page because when the Shadow, like, everybody knows his identity, and like in the show that's watching, obviously the bad guys don't, and he talks with like a normal voice to this girl that also knows his identity, and she's like, "Are you gonna do something about it, Shadow?" or whatever, and he's like, "I want to, Marge. I want to. I'm gonna find him, and I'm gonna make sure he doesn't off the judge." And like he goes and sneaks into the jail to go talk to this guy that just got convicted. And so he goes to talk to the bad guy, but he's going to be in his shadow persona. And I was excited. I was like, what is he going to sound like? And his shadow persona, he's like, "Well, listen here." And then like, and I found the script too. So I was reading along so I could see what was coming. And it says Shadow laughs in his signature laugh. And I was like, oh no. And he's like, and I was like, he's a villain. It was amazing.
He wanted to strike terror.
Yes, of some
The hearts
kind.
of his-
And that's what does.
Yeah, that's what does it. And so yeah, he was at the time.
Because they go, "Is this man well? Does he have some kind of these?" Or they're going, and then the criminals are going, "I'm worried
He's worse than me.
about his mental fitness. Does he have a gun? Take that away from that man.
Yeah, so he was wildly popular.
He could do anything. I give up. Take me away, coppers."
It's so perfect. We should
He's a
do
loose cannon.
a whole pod episode where we just recreate one of the Shadow episodes
Oh my god!
and read the script.
That would actually be.
It would be
I think,
super fun. We're gonna,
I gotta
what?
work
If
on my
anybody,
like
if
a
anybody
suited-
comments to this on the Instagram, including Michaela, if anybody comments and is like, "Please do that," we'll do it.
Yeah, Michaela's still upset that I called her superhero choice basic.
Are you saying that she's still upset in the future?
Yeah, like as she's listening to this right now, Michaela, I'm talking to you from the past. She's still going, "Superhero."
Basic.
Do you remember the Please Rewind movie with Jack Black?
Yes, I do.
Where they there was a magnetic storm or something happened that deleted all the VHS.
And they had to re-record it?
What?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you need to watch it. It's I hope that it stands the test of time and it's still enjoyable.
It's about VHSs, so
Yeah, but he's like left in charge of a movie rental store, right? And they've got VHS movies, and then this accident happened that deletes all the movies. All the movies are blank, and he is trying to save the store, and so they record all the movies over again with themselves.
From memory.
Yeah. So they're like these really short, like 5-minute versions of the movie with just him and a couple friends. And they tell everybody that these are new, sweeted. They're straight from Sweden. They've been sweeted. And for a while after that movie came out, there was a trend. Like you could find, if you look on YouTube, you can find sweeted versions of all kinds of movies.
That's hilarious.
And the kids and Kelly and I actually made a sweeted version of Lilo and Stitch.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
it's on my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
That's so great.
It's pretty fantastic. So we're going to do a sweeted version of the Shadow, except we won't actually sweet it. We'll just pull up the actual dialogue.
Oh man, how
And
many
follow
characters are there? This will be so fun.
So this one that I was reading had like, well, it's like a couple side characters, but you could just do a couple different voices. It was like 3 or 4 main characters, and that's it.
Listeners, spread the word.
That's it.
You know what to do.
Okay, anyways, so the Shadow. So that they can get even more hyped. Here's a little bit more information about him. So here was kind of his supernatural thing that he did, is he could kind of disappear into the darkness. So shadows was his thing. But during the day, he was a wealthy playboy. He wears all black, and he was a heavy influence for which superhero? Can you guess? Batman. Nailed it. And so they kind of took directly from that and created Batman to kind of be Superman's counter. And he was immediately incredibly popular. And he did start out having guns, by the way. He used guns at first. And then...
They shoot bat bullets?
No, they shot regular bullets.
Disappointing.
Yeah. If it was like the Adam West version, it would have been bat bullets, by the way. But it was just the comic one. But they got rid of the guns, and that actually made him even more popular. They loved his like broodiness and his flaws, and anytime that he showed his humanity, they loved. And his creation brought about the creation of the very first supervillain in comic book history, which is obviously the Joker.
Interesting. So the Joker came around before Lex Luthor.
Yeah, first supervillain, the Joker, which I was like, that's the perfect.
They kind of nailed it with the first one.
Yeah, like there is no better supervillain. And they, like the guy that created it, so Jerry Robinson is his name, and he was like, all I really wanted to do was create a supervillain that would be worthy of Batman. And then he was like toying with different sketch ideas and different ideas of how to make him, have as much impact as Batman did. And he always had a deck of cards at home, and they would, pull out the Joker cards and leave them on the side to play, or some games required the Joker cards. But anytime the Joker card was one that always kind of stuck out to him, and he was like, oh my gosh, it's the exact opposite of Batman. Something that is nothing but a sense of humor, with like bright, vibrant colors, and this kind of like crazy unhinged thing to this guy that's like brooding and dark and like really closed in. And they were like a manic serial killer clown. It's perfect to be the counterpoint to Batman. And he really was like terrifying in like, I mean, we all know the Joker. He's just the most amazing supervillain.
He's the bomb diggity.
Yeah.
Why do I even open my mouth? I don't have anything to contribute.
It's fantastic.
Gems like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So then another really big one was called Timely Comics, which later changed its name to Marvel. And Marvel had outlandish, morally ambivalent heroes. That was their direction.
Morally ambiguous or ambivalent?
I said ambivalent. Am I wrong?
Ambivalent means that they don't care about morals?
Yeah. And ambiguous means their morals aren't clear.
Maybe both.
Okay. They're ambiguously ambivalent.
Yeah.
Or ambivalently ambiguous. We don't know.
Word of the day, folks. Ambivalent.
Ambivalent. The combination of both.
Combination.
Put it in the dictionary, Webster.
Yeah, figure it out.
The word of the year.
Patrons can pay to use it.
Then we're offering DLC for the English language.
Exactly.
Unlock our cool slang pack.
Okay, so yeah, they had these very like just crazy out there heroes in comparison to the other comic groups that were publishing. And here is a very important one that they had. One of their top heroes, his name was the Submariner.
Sure.
Submariner.
Yeah.
Submariner?
No, Submariner. That sounds.
That's the word. Yeah.
Submariner.
Yeah.
And his name.
I'm below you, but nothing's below me.
What is that from?
It's from Incredibles. The Underminer.
Yes.
That's perfect. I forgot about him. Okay, but his name is Namor, and he is the first anti-hero in comics, and he's sometimes referred to as Marvel's first mutant. So this is kind of like a big one for Marvel, because not only is he an anti-hero, but he is a mutant, and I feel like I can't believe that he isn't one of my top favorites, because he is the precursor to Aquaman. So Namor is his mother was a princess of Atlantis, and his father was a sea captain, and she was like a blue-skinned Atlantean that urged him to war with the people above the water, and he tried to smooth things over sometimes. Sometimes he warred anyways because he was a bit of an anti-hero. But he was one of their top heroes, along with Captain America and the Human Torch. And Aquaman and Namor have almost the exact same costuming elements. Namor wears a lot less clothing. He basically just wears trunks, swim trunks, but they're green scales and gold belt. So exactly the same colors as Aquaman. And he wields a golden trident. So they did not go far when they created Aquaman. And Aquaman came out a full 2 years later. So that's just so we know. But Namor actually is still getting comics made of him too. And he had his Marvel debut in the Black Panther Wakanda Forever movie, which I never bothered to watch.
He's also in Marvel Snap.
Is he? I did not know that. So you knew about him already more than I did.
Well, I knew he existed, and I know what his Marvel Snap powers are.
Wow, that's pretty good.
That's more than I know.
So then the other two that were kind of the four front runners was Quality Comics. And they invented characters like Plastic Man, and they just published reprints of known comics like The Spirit. And then there was Fox Publications, and all of their heroes were basically entirely derivative. And so an example was the creator of the Blue Beetle, and he was one of Fox's biggest heroes, was quoted as explaining to another comic creator when that comic creator asked, "Where did you get your idea for the Blue Beetle?" He said, "I can tell you everything in 2 words, Green Hornet." And he just made a blue-green hornet. So all of their heroes were very derivative, which is probably why DC and Marvel are the two top, because they were creating really kind of different and original stuff versus this other stuff. But what this did was it opened things up to new writers and new artists, and it was kind of this new medium that was really, really taking over America. It was huge. And a lot of these artists and writers were young sons of immigrants. Women weren't really in the industry much because it was the time. There was very few. There was a couple, but not a lot. And artists often looked at this job as like a stepping stone to another thing. Like they would start doing comics and then they would go be like an architect or something like that. So a lot of them were really surprised that they ended up being in comics and making that their life because it became so popular. It was unexpected for them. And there's an interview that I watched. There was this really great documentary that I pulled some of this information from that is fantastic. I'll put it in the show notes or something because I don't remember what it's called. But there's an interview in it that Stan Lee is talking about it, how he didn't use his real name when he was creating his comic books because his real name is Stanley M. Lieber. But he wanted to save his full name for when he became a famous writer because that was his plan. He was going to be a famous writer, and this was just a stepping stone. And so he just signed his comics Stan Lee. And that obviously like propelled him into like huge famosity.
That one's also in the DLC.
Yeah, you can purchase it. And just like these artists were creating these full pages, and they were only getting $5 a page, which is insane. They'd spend so many hours on a single page and get $5 for it. But also they would do things like make really big explosions or have somebody
to take up a big chunk of the page.
Yeah. So they could get done with one quicker. So yeah.
It would just be like, and then our hero went blind, and then it's all black with words.
That's why were you not in the industry, Josh? You could have made bank. So yeah, this is like in the early 40s when it was taking off hugely, and it was said that it was an industry built off of sticky dimes because it became incredibly popular with the youths. And because of this demographic, they started to kind of cater towards it a little bit. And so they started creating sidekicks. And Stan Lee also said if he was a superhero, the last thing he would want to do is pal around with a teenager. At the very least, people would talk. And that's what he said. I thought it was really funny. But he went along with it, and it was popular because it was the kids. You know, like the more mature readers would identify with the adult heroes, and the younger ones would be able to identify more with the sidekicks. And then at this point, this is when America starts getting involved in World War II. And what's really interesting is because the comic books are kind of created by this immigrant community, especially a very heavily Jewish community, they were very motivated to do something to try and support the war effort and to try and make sure that they were explaining what was going on. They described comic books as becoming very propaganda in a lot of them. And a lot of the covers, like when you look back at them, they did not age well. They were like very racist. But that's when they created Captain America. Like the first cover of Captain America is him punching Hitler in the face. And people loved it because it helped them connect with the people that their loved ones that were serving in the war, and they would send comic books to soldiers, and the soldiers felt like they were being supported and recognized.
And back in the day, there were a lot fewer fans of Hitler, so it was probably better received.
Are there more fans now? That feels like not good. Yeah, it's the opposite of good. So yeah, and like what I also loved about this is the way that the medium was allowed to grow and change as the people grew and changed. So it wasn't just that the heroes were growing and changing to help support the people and their needs and address like political and social and economic and all these other issues. But they also allowed the art to, I tried not to go on too many tangents, but I just think it's so interesting because the art gives a history of the comic books in and of themselves. So these like older, like the versions that are in the 1930s, they look much more like those old newspaper cartoons, like Alfie and George or something, that's very round, soft lines. Nothing is like overly active or busy. And then we start seeing, so Jack Kirby had a style, especially with the Flash, I think it was, where he had real heavy, thick, like line. So in art, we call it line quality, how thick and thin a line is. And he had excellent use of this dynamic line quality where it kind of changed. It would be thick and thin, and he would just fill the space with this movement. And the character was always moving. Things were always moving. And so they called it heavy brush. And his work was so much more energetic and exciting to read that it caught on hugely. And so we kind of see that change. And then as like the times go on, like you see the art change in the 60s and again in the 70s. And then we have like a whole nother style. If you look at modern ones, anything after 2000 is like these real crisp, sharp lines. We have a lot of those. And I don't know. I just love how we get to see sort of these trends within just the way that we represent these characters in ink and color, and how it kind of reflects the people reading them. Anyways, I got off track.
I know you said this was a potential tangent-full episode, and we've had a lot of tangents.
Yeah, I'm real sorry. At least I warned people at the beginning.
No, but we also, Brad and I have both.
That's
gone
true.
off on tangents. So.
Also, just as another side note, really quick, the creators of Superman had a real problem with trying to figure out how Superman was not in the war, because they were like, he could finish the war in a day. Like, he would solve the problem. And so we have to figure out how to make him not be in the war. And I thought that was cute, because I was like, he's not real. Like, he's not actually going to go over there and handle Hitler for us. But I love that they cared enough that the people were so immersed in the story that they wanted to have a reason. So what they did was they had Superman go to enlist, and he was so excited to enlist that he accidentally used his X-ray vision to read the eye chart in the next room instead of the room he was in. So he failed the eye exam, and they deemed him unfit to serve. And they were like, it was great because it was another reason for Lois to be mad at him. And he ends up having to stay. And then they get to say stuff like on one of the headers or something. They're like, besides the American soldiers don't need the help of Superman to win the war. They're already super enough or something.
So was there a period of time where Superman was getting crap from people after that? Like, hey, Blindy, we don't need your help.
Well, I mean, Clark Kent wears glasses, so they already knew. And Lois Lane gets mad at him for not being able to go. She's like, you're another fight.
Was it Clark? So it wasn't Superman.
No, it was
up.
Clark.
It was Clark who was gonna.
Yeah, so Clark Kent showed up to enlist.
I had imagined Superman showing up.
I did say Superman, but he was dressed as Clark Kent.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. And also during this time, women started joining the workforce. Obviously, because men were off at war, and the heroes at the time were all men, more or less, and the women were kind of just like eye candy. They were played as girlfriends. They were more like cheerleaders. Even if there was a girl with superpowers, she was always sort of just there to make sure the superhero guy could get stuff done. And then,
when did Wonder Woman come into the thing? Do you have a date for that? Am I skipping?
1941. So the year that America joined the war.
So kind of that same, right?
Yeah.
The attitude where women are coming into the workforce, and now we see a strong woman coming into comics.
Yeah. So they created her as a response to that. And so, and the creator, which Wonder Woman primarily has been written by men for most of their stuff, and the creator was a man, but he believed that women were emotionally superior and that one day the world would be run by women. And so he mimicked that sentiment in Wonder Woman's backstory in that she comes from the island of all
Amazons. It's a matriarchal
society. Yeah. And so he mimicked that in her thing. The problem is that she stays pretty fetishy in a lot of her comic books. Somehow, for some reason, there's a lot of leashes and chains. She's almost always tied up at some point in every comic. So it was, great to see a woman that was lead woman, but they still had some.
What was the movie about that? There's a movie about the creation of Wonder Woman that talked about, it was...
S&M Wonder Woman story?
Well...
No.
Basically, honestly.
Kind of.
There's a guy and his wife, and he was a college professor, and one of their students got brought into it or something.
Yeah, I forgot what it's called, but yeah, I forgot about that movie entirely.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, yes, the backstory
risque.
of the risque character is itself quite risque.
Yeah, it doesn't fall far from the tree.
So is this movie based on reality?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the creator of Wonder Woman had fetishy relations with his wife? Is that what you're saying?
That he was in a throuple, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And there
in
was
the 40s.
some fetish.
You're too far away from the mic, Josh.
Oh. Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Woman, plural.
Wonder Women.
Women, yeah. Woman, plural.
Yeah. So anyways, Not great, but at least like we got a female superhero. All right. Now we're getting down to it.
Yeah.
To the crime.
Booyakasha.
Yes. So the war wraps up. And the problem with superheroes at this time is they were very geared towards like younger and not as mature audience, and also from a group of people that had not just come home from a war, so it was a little bit more carefree in a lot of ways. And so after the war, there was sort of a demand for more mature content, or content that was relatable to these people that were post-war people and that kind of stuff. And so they started to, in addition to comic books, they started getting into other genres like romance, westerns, crime, horror crimes. And as the superhero comics sort of slowed down, they'd mix in these other genres. And within this, they started getting more and more graphic in their violence to sort of fulfill what it appeared the masses were looking for at the time. And that spilled into comic books as well. They would get more and more violent or more suggestive. And so there was some quote unquote studies done and on the youths, because they believed, there was a study done by Dr. Friedrich Wertham, and he was a German-born psychiatrist, and he wrote a couple books of his findings that he said. The book was called Horror in the Nursery and Seduction of the Innocent. And basically he said, I've been doing these studies and comic books are making kids violent. They are turning them aggressive and more like lewd and sexual. And all of these comic books are leading to crimes.
So I just want to pop in here and say, those book titles, I think maybe that's the first clickbait titles that we've
It is a little
seen.
clickbaity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if you're like a worried mom, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And he's even quoted as saying, I think Hitler was a beginning compared to the comic book industry.
Wow.
Yeah.
Using Hitler.
Yeah.
Man.
Yikes. Woof. And
Rama Lama.
he is, but not in a good way. So he started describing how these, characters and stories, he sort of twisted them to like demonstrate how it supported his theories. And it became wildly popular. There's a lot of wildly popular things happening all of a sudden in the United States. And a bunch of organizations were like, you're right. The youths are so much more violent than they were before. It's comic books' fault. And so groups that mostly consisted of church groups and like rallying mothers would, try to, there was like government sanctioned groups, but they were like, we got to get these comic books under control. And so some of them would do things where they're like, if you bring us 3 comic books, we'll get you free admission into a theater. And they started having people collect their comic books, and they would collect them at like schools or churches or like big arenas. And they would pile all the books in the middle and light them all on fire. They burned hundreds of thousands of comic books. And I just have to say, burning books is never the solution. So they said that, among other things, it encouraged youths to mimic that behavior. The things that they were seeing in pictures and in words, that it increased violence, it increased crimes, sexual acts, homosexuality, all these things that they were terrified of. And so they would bring them out to all these places. And some of the main places that these burnings were happening, like notable comic book burnings, was in Spencer, West Virginia, Binghamton, New York, and Cape Girardeau, Missouri.
We didn't get away from the French. You said no French.
It's Girardeau.
How's it pronounced, Brandon?
It's Missouri, so it's Cape Girardeau.
Yeah. Giraldo. I don't know.
We're in America, because they say like Amarillo, Texas. Come on. It's amarillo.
I think it's really interesting that, so, as a youth, having been a youth, right? When I was growing up, what was blamed for the violence and on all the ills of the youth?
Video games?
It was video games.
Oh, I was going to say Satan.
Satan is the root cause, right?
He's in the video games.
Um,
You can buy him as a DLC.
You do.
Patreon viewers.
Viewers. There's no viewers. This is an audio-only format.
Anyway, just it's interesting to me, right? That before video games, probably between video games and comic books, there was something else like movies or something like that. But this, it's just a standard practice for the older generation to be displeased with the younger generation and find something to blame.
Yeah, there need some kind of scapegoat.
Music
Yeah.
or whatever.
I remember when for a while magic cards were evil.
Oh yeah.
And Mom, didn't she like burn a bunch of your magic cards?
I don't know if she burned it. That's pretty extreme but she definitely made us get rid of them like at one point.
I thought,
but I think that I was able to just give them to a friend.
Oh.
I don't remember the burning, but maybe I blocked it out.
Because it was so traumatic.
But I mean, there was also a point where Mom and Dad kind of felt like playing cards was
I remember that too.
because
It was very brief.
encourages gambling,
Yeah.
or whatever.
It was very brief.
I don't know. I think someday maybe the older generation will look at the younger generation and be like, they're okay, and not have to find a reason to explain
Why they're terrible.
They're different, and I don't like it.
Yeah.
But not my generation.
Yeah, you
Screw
know
those guys.
Okay, because here's the thing: is that parents look at their kids and are displeased with the way that their kids behave, and then they go, "Well, it's not our parenting for sure. It's got to be something outside of that. What could it?" And then they're going to cast around. What can we lay the blame upon?
Jazz.
Yeah. To this day, my kids are infected with
Jazz music.
No, but like, it's hilarious to me. Okay, there's this really interesting book by Harold Kushner called "How Good Do You Have to Be?" I think it is, where he talks about how when people assume, this is a real tangent we're getting on, but I apologize.
That's okay.
When people get sick, a lot of times they assume, or they get hurt, or some tragedy befalls it, they assume, oh, it's because I did something bad and it's a punishment. That's not really the case, right? God isn't really a punisher like that.
Yeah.
People get sick or they get hurt because it happens,
Yeah.
not because somebody did something wrong, right? And he's like, it's telling that we would rather assume that we're so bad that God punished us with a terrible tragedy than just admit the fact that life is out of our control, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're always looking for some reason because we don't want to admit that things can be random or the things that happen that we don't want to.
Mm-hmm. So, like, is it a little bit like older generations are like, we don't like that things are changing
Yeah.
and we can't control or predict it, and so it's harmful and frightening.
Yeah.
Here's this evil thing.
We need a scapegoat, something to point our anger and displeasure at, right? And comic books, like I love my kids, but I don't love what's happening here. I need somewhere to let out this anger that I have. I'm gonna point it at comic books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Or video games,
Right.
or movies, or music, or whatever.
Yeah.
As long as it's not them just admitting, oh, maybe I just don't like my kids that much. Maybe I raised a bunch of brats.
Well, yeah, and it spread, like, it was widespread hysteria about this huge thing for a while, and it hit comic book sales, and it hit the companies really hard, and they had to figure out a way to make these groups happy so they could sell comic books again, essentially. And so, other than the fact that hundreds and thousands of books were blamed and then burned, which just like is so heartbreaking. But then what came of that is known as the Comics Code Authority. And what that was these groups came up with a very strict set of rules, and it was like 30 rules that every comic book had to fulfill. Like they had to make sure that they followed these guidelines. And if they did, when they submitted their work to this authority, they would stamp it with the like comic code authority. And it literally was like a little drawn postage stamp symbol, and it read approved by the Comics Code Authority, and it had like it looked like an A that had two like hands coming up on either side, like the bar in the A was extended and came up.
It showed up in the Spider-Man movie.
Yes.
In the beginning.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And
in the cartoon.
It's interesting because Spider-Man plays a very big role in this Comic Codes Authority I'm going to get to here in a second.
So is this kind of like the ESRB?
I don't know what that is.
So the difference between the ESRB is like a independent industry body or whatever, right? Whereas the Comic Code Authority was them basically censoring themselves. It was made up of the people that sold comics.
Mm-hmm. And so it basically was like any blood, any sexual innuendos, any anti-authority leanings, any drug anything, race or gender issues. You can't say horror. Like good always had to win. You could not show bad guys in any kind of sympathetic light. I'm going to read.
You can't say horror?
Yeah. How was it said, Josh?
Hooah! We can't. You removed those from the last one.
Doesn't matter.
It's not going to make sense to anybody.
It's a personal joke for the three of us.
All right.
Okay, so let's see. Like in every instance, good shall triumph over evil, and the criminal is punished for his misdeeds. All scenes of horror, excessive bloodshed, gory or gruesome crimes, depravity, lust, sadism, masochism shall not be permitted. Scenes dealing with instruments associated with Walking Dead, torture, vampires, vampirism, ghouls, cannibalism, werewolves of any kind are prohibited. You can have any of those in any comics.
How would the Joker even fit in the comic after?
I know, right? And it's very severely restricted what could be shown. And there's so many more. Like maybe what I'll do is I'll post a couple screenshots of some of them on the Instagram. So go to Arts and Crimes Pod on Instagram and you can see more because it's such a long list and it's kind of crazy. Some of the things that are in there. Like this one, I'm just going to say one more. Female shall be drawn realistically without exaggeration of any physical qualities.
Which physical qualities do you think they're referring to? It's a mystery.
So anyways, and after this, like really the comic book industry was decimated. Shelves were emptied, stories became bland and really undesirable to readers. And most superhero comics at this time came to a halt. And they started trying to embrace other genres where they could more successfully tell a story without, handicapping their characters. And the audience sizes shrank. It just continually shrank. And that I think is like part of the crime, honestly, is all of this. Because very shortly after all of this hubbub hit the fan, actual doctors did actual studies and released that they confirmed that there was no correlation between delinquent behavior and the consumption of the comic book medium.
Dun, dun, dun.
Bum, bum, bum. So really, it just like there was a lot of damage done to the industry. There was this comic book code authority that really hampered what they could do with the characters. And again, burning books, I just hate that happened. And it's happened a lot of times in a lot of other things, but
Maybe worse than burning witches.
I can't say that. But they still tried to come up with heroes that were engaging. And so this is sort of where I think Stan Lee is the true superhero of heroes here. And so he was ready to leave the industry because of what had happened to it, and it was not lucrative anymore. But he also felt like his characters could not tell any meaningful stories anymore. And so he was talking to his wife about how he wanted to quit, and she was like, well, if you're going to quit, why not create something that you care about? And if it doesn't get picked up and nobody reads it, who cares? Because you're going to quit anyways. And so he was like, okay. And he came up with the Fantastic Four. And he was like, if it doesn't succeed, whatever. But for whatever reason, this Fantastic Four team, they loved. Actually, not for whatever reason. I can tell you why they broke down why they thought it was so accepted. And especially like these heroes that he was creating, like the Avengers, the Hulk. This is when X-Men came around, Spider-Man. These heroes had real problems that they had to deal with, like day-to-day stuff. They had anxieties. They had like depression and real things that readers could connect with again. And so the Fantastic Four also sort of touched on this kind of space age stuff, which is what we were starting to get into. And so he was hitting in the right subject area and in the right kind of genre. So he's taking them and advancing them past this like older sort of, we've got the skull cave and, you know, kind of ideas. And readers loved that because they saw all of their flaws in these heroes that were still overcoming these issues. Stan Lee tried to think about how his characters would react to the real world. And so his dialogue started reflecting that, where they would have real life moments where the rock guy in the Thing, was talking about how, you know, he wasn't sure how he was going to find pants that were going to fit him anymore because he was huge, or, you know, stuff like that, where it was sort of not really talked about in comic books before, like normal everyday reactions to things. And so it was a lot easier for the people to connect to them. And that was why. And then other like mediums and other areas started picking up on these heroes as well. So this is in the 60s. There's an art movement that I know we talked about before, with a very famous artist that was almost assassinated.
Van Gogh. Sorry,
Hold
Picasso.
on.
You got it.
Andy Warhol.
Yeah! You nailed it.
Vermeer.
So Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein both used comic books heavily in their pop art, and people loved it. And Roy Lichtenstein actually specifically designed a TV guide cover for the Adam West Batman show. And so it started like picking up popularity and picking up steam again. And then after this has been going on for a while, Stan Lee created the teenage superhero Spider-Man. And he was super relatable because he was like this unpopular nerd. He had money problems. He wasn't great with women, but he was like good at science. He had his like one thing. And he had to learn about responsibility and power and hardships, and how with great responsibility comes great power.
Great power.
With great
Reverse that.
Yeah. With great power. With great power comes great responsibility. There it is. With great power comes great responsibility. Anyways, so, and for the first time, I mean, one of the main ones that really made the Spider-Man comics great was that Peter Parker was such an interesting character. And so it wasn't just his superhero persona, but who he was as a person. And he was super popular with the youths because he was a teenager. And then this came about at a time, Spider-Man became very popular at a time where the president was declaring a war on drugs. And so people came to Stan Lee, and they were like, hey, can you do something about maybe talking about how terrible drugs are in your Spider-Man comic? Because it is terrible. And he was like, yeah. Stan Lee was super into that idea. He wanted to do something to help, promote this idea of the anti-drug message. And so he created this story, and it was about this kid that gets high and walks off of a building, and Spider-Man has to save him. And he says something like, if there's something that can mess you up so much that you do that, like, why would you ever put that in your body? Something like that. Like, it's not an incredibly complex story. And he sent it to get approved by the Comic Code Association, and they rejected it.
Because it talks about drugs,
Because it talks about drugs, and you can't talk about drugs. And he was like, why? This is not even putting drugs in a good light. And they're like, you can't have drugs of any kind represented. And so Stan Lee went to the producers, the Marvel guys, and he was like, I really think this story is great as it is, and we should publish it without the stamp. And the Marvel people were like, do it. And he published, since the Comic Code Association was enacted, he published his first series without that stamp on it. And it was crazy well received. People bought it up like crazy. Parents loved it. They loved the message. It was hugely impactful, and it sold out just over and over and over again. And all of the producers and stuff and Stan Lee were like looking around, like nobody was bothered that stamp wasn't there. Like, can we get away with this? And suddenly it wasn't necessary anymore. And it broke the floodgates, and people were allowed to make comic books open and freely again because of this. So again, I'm not a huge Spider-Man fan. I'm not. But I really appreciate what Stan Lee did through the medium of Spider-Man, because it really allowed comic books to hit those really hard lessons and subjects in ways that readers can connect. I mean, that's why we love stories, right? Because we can experience and understand things and learn things and have these connections without having to live them ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful thing, especially when, people like Stan Lee are behind the wheel, giving us these stories that are so positive for us. And so comic books were allowed to be, again, all of these things that they weren't before. And we had more, characters that in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and we started getting just huge ranges of characters that hit huge ranges of subject matter. And this is where we're able to get superheroes like Stan Lee. I can't remember if it was Stan Lee or if it was just Marvel, but Marvel created the first Black superhero, which was T'Challa from Wakanda. Mm-hmm. And also, dang it, what is his name? Luke Cage, who mm-hmm. was also the first mercenary superhero ever. And they were allowed to create these characters because they kind of broke out of this box they had been put in. And as a side note for you, Brandon, Spawn, who was a character that absolutely would not have been allowed to be made previously, because it's super violent. He's like a hellspawn, and that absolutely wouldn't be allowed. But he became incredibly popular, and with the publication of his 300th issue is the longest single character running comic hero.
Wow.
So he set a record there. And the creator, Todd McFarlane, is that it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The creator was able to do things with that character that he would have never been able to do. And what he said is he hopes that it lives longer than he does, that people continue to take the mantle of Spawn and create more and more comics, and that he can take on a life of his own afterwards. And I think that that's kind of what all of these comic book creators kind of hope for, right? Is that these heroes can continue to live on, because what they've done in the past, they're hoping they can do for us in the future, right? Which is help us as readers understand ourselves and each other and our environment more so that we can be better through this medium, you know?
I think what you said there is pretty important for people to understand, because comic books, maybe it's not the same as it used to be when I was growing up, but comic books were never really given too much of a serious thought. They're silly or whatever, right? They're these silly stories about these extraordinary people, and a lot of times, like you said, the female figure is exaggerated, and there's just a lot about comic books that makes at a glance you maybe dismiss what there is in there. And you brought up the fact that I Spawn is my favorite, but really it's sort of just a funny coincidence that he's my favorite, because I was also very dismissive of comic books. But in high school, I had a girlfriend who was artsy, and she liked comic books, and she drew very comic book style art, like in a lot of her sketches and things. And I wanted to connect with her, but I didn't, care about comics. And so I just randomly stopped in at a comic book and magic card store and was looking through stuff, and just Spawn caught my eye. And when I went to look into it more, I realized that there's a character with an incredible amount of depth, and going through stuff that would be amazingly difficult and hard to overcome. And it was just such a far removed from I'm gonna bash on Superman, I guess, a little bit, but his is such a there's just not a lot, I feel to the Superman character. I'm sure that he's developed more or whatever, but when I think about comic books and I think about Superman, it's just here's a guy that nothing ever goes wrong for him. He's always right. He's never sad. There's really nothing to him. He is what you see on the surface, in my opinion, or what I've come to know of Superman. But Spawn, just such a tormented character.
Yeah, and it connects us, and even sometimes with ourselves. And I love that about them, because it also, I think, that medium in particular, I love that it can get to multiple audiences, because it is written. There's written words that are important, and it's that form of writing, but it also is the visual aspect. So, I love reading. I enjoy reading, but not everybody likes to sit down and read a full page of words, It's a lot of words, so many. So it gives access to these fantastic worlds and these other connections that we're experiencing in other books in a whole other medium that is more accessible to more people, I think. So I just loved it, and I wanted to share that love a little bit via this pod medium.
Whores.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah. So is there anything? I don't want to cut you guys off before we sum up.
No,
Nothing.
I think you guys covered it.
Yeah. It's fantastic. If you don't have a favorite superhero, take time for yourself to find your hero, or a few. There's lots. We've established my favorite is Gambit and Aquaman. Josh's is Batman. Brandon's is Spawn. Of the Bat universe, my favorite is the Red Hood. So thanks for stopping by. Maybe go do some art, and don't do some crime. So there you go.
That was inspirational.
Thank you. Maybe that's our new sign off.
Yeah.
Go do some art.
Go do some art. Don't do crime.
Some crime.
Bye.
Great. See you later, listeners. Don't look backwards.
Your brain will freak you out.
up, listeners? This is the Sandman here coming at you live. We've got a great show for you tonight.
90 straight minutes of Kenny G. I won't talk again. I'm going to go have a nap.